All right, welcome to this session on personal protective equipment and self-contained breathing apparatus. So with personal protective equipment, we can separate it into two types, and that's the personal protective clothing that we wear and the respiratory protection equipment that we wear to protect our airways and our breathing. So again, the PPE is there to protect us from from heat and physical injuries. SCBA provides a respiratory protection for an established amount of time, and that amount of time is going to vary depending on the quantity of the cylinders that you're using. We also, as part of the SCBA package, there's what's called a Personal Alert Safety System, or a PASS. This emits a loud audible alarm to assist firefighters in locating you during an emergency situation. So in the event that you were to go down inside of a building and you needed to be rescued, this audible alarm would be sounding and would help the firefighters coming in to save you to find you. Now the PASS is integrated into most SCBA. It used to be a separate device, but it's actually part of the SCBA now. So the PPE and SCBA used together, this enables firefighters to enter smoky and toxic environments. So we'll talk a bit about structural firefighting PPE. So to be effective, the entire ensemble needs to be worn. The PPE enables our firefighters to work in areas with high temperatures and high concentration of toxic gases and smoke. It can be worn with your SCBA and PASS device, and it's designed to cover every inch of your body. So we don't want anything exposed anything that is exposed can then burn, and you can be injured that way. So to ensure that our PPE is functioning appropriately, we need to make sure that we're cleaning it, maintaining it, and regularly inspecting our PPE. So all of our PPE has to meet the specifications found in an NFPA guideline, NFPA 1971, and that's the standard on protective ensembles for structural firefighting and proximity firefighting. We never are to alter our protective clothing. Alterations are only to be done by a qualified third-party contractor. So personal protective equipment has several design benefits and limitations. Some of the benefits: it allows firefighters to access areas where we wouldn't be able to access without PPE. It prevents injury from cuts and abrasions. It's a bit of warmth in the winter, and it helps keep us dry. Firefighting, we tend to get wet when we're fighting fire because of the water we're using to extinguish the fire. Some of the limitations we should be aware of, though, with the PPE is that the tasks that we now have to perform require a little bit more energy and strength to get them accomplished. The PPE actually can retain body heat and perspiration and prevent heat transfer away from the body. So it doesn't only keep the heat from coming out, from outside in, it prevents it from inside out. So it doesn't wick away the same way it would in your normal street clothing. The PPE also can have some limit on our mobility and our range of motion, and it decreases our normal sensory abilities. So we're not going to feel things the way that we would normally feel them. Practicing in our PPE, that can definitely help us get used to it, get used to wearing it, get used to working in it, and give us a sense of what to expect when we're out on an emergency scene. So structural firefighting PPE, basically the PPE jacket and pants are composed of 3 different layers, and these are important to understand. The first, as you can see on the photo there, is A, and that's the outer shell. B is a moisture barrier, keeps out the moisture and water coming inside, and C is the thermal layer, and that's what's going to protect us from getting burned. So the protective coat, again, 3 layers: protective outer shell, it has a moisture barrier, and has a thermal barrier. There's a flap on the jacket where the zipper is, and that provides a secure double seal so that we don't have that weak point at the zipper. There are wristlets typically with the protective coat. You can see them on the photo on the left here, and that helps to keep our sleeves down when we put our gloves on and make sure that we don't have any exposed skin. And then a newer device that's been incorporated into the protective coat recently is known as the drag rescue device. You'll see it on the back of your gear, and it might be marked with a DRD for drag rescue device. And what that does is it actually it's actually like a form of webbing inside the coat, when you open it up, you pull the webbing like you see on the photo on the right, and there is actually mesh that will come up and act as a harness and allow firefighters to basically then drag you out using this device. All PPE and protective coats are included in this have a 10-year service life. At the end of 10 years, they must be replaced. So the protective pants, typically they're going to be constructed to match the coat. We want to have, we want to look professional. We want to have similar pants as we would jacket. In some cases, when you're coming into a department, you might have a mismatched set, but as time goes on, hopefully you're able to get a complete set. It has that 3-layer protective system, as we talked about before: the outer shell, the moisture barrier, and the thermal layer. It has reinforced ankles and knees typically. Again, these ankles and knees, ankles for possibly stepping on them helps protect from that. Knees, we're crawling around a lot, and it's good to have that extra reinforcement in there. And your pants need to be large enough to don quickly and move easily, but not so large that you're going to be tripping all over them. Boots. So structural firefighting boots are very, very different from any other kind of boots you're going to get. They must meet a standard, again, the same standard as turnout gear, which is the NFPA 1971 requirements. They're typically going to be constructed of rubber or leather. You'll see the rubber boots still in service, but we have been moving more towards the leather boots in recent times. The outer layer is going to repel water and is going to be flame and cut resistant, and that's a requirement in NFPA 1971. The inner liner is actually going to add a thermal layer and a thermal protection to it. So like I said, we've been moving towards the leather boots. I don't know if any of you have ever had to try and work in rubber boots with a steel toe in the middle of winter, but I can tell you that you don't get a lot of work done in them, and it ends up that your feet freeze and you're going to have to take some time to warm up. These leather boots actually have a little bit more of that barrier and are able to keep your feet warmer in wintertime.
Hey, Sean. Darcy here.
Hey, Darcy.
Hey, I just popped on to make sure Chris made it on there. I see he's there, so he's our new recruit with Silver Creek there. So glad to see he made it. So I'll continue on with the video presentations when I see them in my hands with them.
Sounds good, Darcy. Thanks.
All right. Thanks. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
All right. So structural firefighting gloves. These gloves are designed to protect from heat, liquid, vapors, cuts, and penetrations. It's important that we wear our gloves whenever we're doing work. If we're manipulating hose, if we're we're cleaning up at the end, I see firefighters all the time taking them off. These are part of our PPE, and they should be worn whenever we're using our hands to do any kind of work. Again, they come in a variety of styles. There's so many different options out there. And I highly recommend you look for a pair that is going to give you enough dexterity to do the job that you need to do and aren't going to turn out to be too bulky, because that's when people stop using their PPE, is when it doesn't fit correctly. So with our gloves, when they're wet, we want to make sure we never wring or twist the gloves. And that's what that's going to do is it's going to actually bunch up the protective layers inside and create these weak spots where heat can get through. So you need to become accustomed to performing all of your skills while wearing gloves. And that comes with practice. So our protective hood, or Balaklava. This was, again, something that back in the day wasn't used. Firefighters could tell that they were going into a place that was maybe a little too hot because their ears would start to burn and they would start to feel that heat on their exposed skin that wasn't covered around their head. The protective hood was designed and developed to basically close that gap and ensure that there are no gaps in your PPE. So it covers that exposed skin. It's going to be constructed of a flame-resistant material. Some hoods actually are now starting to include what's called a particulate protection. So the products of combustion, smoke, and the particulates that become airborne. There's been research that actually shows that some of the biggest areas of concern are around the neck area and around the ear area, is where these particulates can get through the old style hoods and actually accumulate there and these are carcinogenic. They can cause cancer. So now they're coming out with these particulate protection hoods as well. So the protective hood in Balaklava is worn over the edges of the face piece, but it's under the helmet. So we typically we'll put the face piece on first, we'll pull our Balaklava up and make sure that there's no gaps, and then our helmet will go on top of that. So and we need to be wearing the Balaklava at all incidents that require SCBA. We cannot be in it. There's no reason to be in your SCBA if you're not, and not wear your Balaklava as well. Firefighting helmet. So again, 1971 standard for men FPA. It protects against impacts from falling objects. It also helps protect the back of our neck from water and hot embers getting down and under and into our turnout gear. Most helmets and the ones that we provide in the CSRD all come with face and eye protection. They're often color-coded according to your rank and your function. And like the other PPE, it has a 10-year service life. Doesn't matter if it's been, if it still looks like it's in good condition. At the end of 10 years, NFPA has told us that we need to replace our full set of turnout gear and including our helmet. So there's some additional PPE that you might find as well that we may use depending on the situation. So approved goggles, the photo in the center there, hearing protection on the left. A hand light is actually a form of additional PPE. A radio, a reflective vest, and the reflective vest is worn to increase visibility at roadway incidents. And you can see the difference between the firefighter on the photo on the top right there, the firefighter that is wearing a protective or a high visibility vest, and the one who isn't. There is a big difference for the motorists coming down the roadway. Anytime you're going to be doing work on or near a roadway, you need to be wearing this high visibility vest. They are not to be worn anytime you are going to be doing proximity firefighting or interior operations firefighting, because again, these are not structural gear. It's basically made of plastics and hydrocarbons that will melt away and could end up destroying your gear, and in worst case scenario, could end up injuring you. There's also PPE that gets worn for wildland fires, and there's a different acceptable PPE if we're to respond to a wildland fire. It actually meets a different NFPA standard, and that's NFPA 1977. Still made of fire-resistant materials, but it's more designed for comfort and maneuverability. Helmet, eye protection, gloves, boots. It's designed for comfort, and the boots are designed for comfort and sure footing as well. Structural gear is not designed for extended wildland firefighting. You'll tend to overheat. It gets bunchy. It's very big and bulky for you to be walking through the woods with. And it just doesn't do what we want it to do. So using coveralls, wearing coveralls that are flame resistant, as opposed to wearing your structural gear, is acceptable. Or there's also proper made wildland uniforms that can be worn. Our SPU teams are issued them, and again, they're fire resistant, much more comfortable to work in a wildfire setting. So donning and doffing PPE. It's one of the skills you need to become very acquainted with and need to practice quite often. So donning PPE has to be done in a specific order to obtain the maximum protection and to do it as quickly as possible. One thing that we need to be aware of is we should never don our PPE inside a moving apparatus. If a vehicle is in motion and you're in the back seat and you're waiting to get to the call, that is not the time to be putting on your PPE. It should be done in the hall before you get on the apparatus. So when we doff our PPE, it's going to be done in the reverse procedure that we use to getting dressed. Once we're done doffing the gear, it needs to be cleaned and stored. And again, clean gear is safe gear. It used to be the days when we'd go to a fire and we'd, come back with all the black on and say, oh, that shows, I'm a firefighter, I do work. That's not, we've also now, we know that can cause damage to our structural protection gear. So we need to keep it clean. And it actually requires us to take all the different layers out and wash them separately in most cases. And our PPE should never be kept in living or sleeping areas or vehicles. So any place and we should keep it out of areas of, that we're going to be spending a lot of time. We keep it in the base. We keep it in our lockers. what happens is those hydrocarbons, those particulates, the chemicals, they all get inside and they soak into that PPE. And we're finding now that it off gases for quite a long time. And it's off gassing carcinogens and cancer causing agents. So we need to be aware of that and get that, once we get out of it, if we're going and we're doing live fire training now, we're very strong on making sure that everyone doffs their gear, get your jacket off, put it off to the side, and don't just sit there, inhaling it from the smoke that's now saturated into your gear. So the proper order for donning is we start with our hood, our protective hood. And the reason we do this is because it actually ends up going underneath our suspenders then. So after that, we put on our pants and boots, which usually are set up in a unit. We have our boots set up inside of our pants. So once we put the hood on, we put the pants and boots on, we can put the suspenders on, and it actually goes over top of that hood, keeping it down and making sure that it doesn't fly up and there'll be no gaps in our protection. After that, the jacket, then our helmet, and then our gloves. So again, donning is putting our PPE on, doffing, that's taking it off. Firefighters need to be able to don your personal protective equipment in 1 minute or less. So again, 1 minute to get all of that on. When we add the SCBA to the equation, it needs to be done in 2 minutes. Full PPE and SCBA in 2 minutes. That's an NFPA regulation and standard. For our purposes, what it shows is that you're able to don it quickly, you know your gear very well, well enough to be able to get into it in a couple of minutes. So with this one, I have a video. I don't know if I'll be able to play it or not. Oh, let's see if I can go back there. Hopefully it comes up. Now, it's not coming up. I'm going to see if I can pull it up on this. 1 second here. All right. Well, my video is not working right now. I will see if I can get it to come up at a different point. 1 second here, actually. I think I have another way of doing it. All right. So all right, can you see the video now?
In this video, we are going to show you how to don and doff your personal protective clothing, also known as turnouts. Prepare your turnouts for quick and efficient donning. Time will begin when I say, don your turnouts. Ready, set, don your turnouts. Don your hood, step into the boots, and don your pants. And place your suspenders over your shoulders. Don the coat, making sure the skirt of the hood is under the coat. Make sure the coat collar is fastened. Roll hood down over coat collar. Don helmet, making sure chin strap is secure. Don gloves. Time stops when you clap your hands. Do a buddy check, making sure your partner's turnouts are fully donned. Doff turnouts when directed. Notice the boots are still inside the pants, ready for reuse. Doffing is complete when turnouts are in position for reuse.
All right. So that was a great illustration of what we call a dressing drill, where you have your gear set up in front of you, and you're timed to see how quickly you can put your turnout gear on. And again, you can see the order that he put it on. He started off the hood, went on to the to the pants and boots, jacket, helmet, and gloves. And time stops when you clap your hands. Now, we have no standard for how long it takes to take off your turnout gear, because again, there's not usually the sense of urgency with that. All right. So PPE inspection and maintenance. We need to check the condition of our PPE regularly. We also need to repair worn or damaged PPE immediately. We cannot wait. If you see damage to your PPE, that could compromise your safety on scene. So anything that you see needs to be flagged, brought to the attention of your company officers, and they'll look to get that sent away for repair or replacement from a qualified third-party contractor. We need to clean our PPE whenever necessary. So we get it dirty, we need to keep it clean. And we always follow the manufacturer's instructions. We want to also make sure, so if we have a fire call and we've been cleaning our PPE, we need to make sure our PPE is dry before we're using it on the fire ground. Wet PPE can actually cause burns, because the moisture inside the PPE can heat up to a point where it actually converts into steam, and that steam can now burn us underneath our PPE. So with our protective hood and gloves, we want to repair or discard any items with holes. Again, they can be replaced. Most departments do have a stock of gloves and balaclavas on hand. So if you have any issues with them, bring it up to your company officer, let them know, show them the issue, and ask them for another set of gloves or another balaclava. Even a small cut or an opening can result in an injury with this. With our boots, we do not store our boots in direct sunlight. That can actually end up breaking them down and causing a thermal damage to them over time, and make them less effective when we need them. Okay, we've talked about the PPE and our turnout gear. Now we're going to talk a little bit about respiratory protection. An SCBA is both expensive and a very complicated piece of equipment. Using one confidently, it requires a lot of practice. Firefighters need to be proficient in using an SCBA before they engage in fire suppression activities. We should not be going up and our first time using an SCBA is at a fire call. That's not acceptable. We need to be very good at using them before we actually need it in an emergency situation. So the interior atmosphere of a burning building is considered to be an IDLH environment. And IDLH stands for immediately dangerous to life and health. That means you take a couple of breaths of the superheated smoke and gases that are inside of a burning building, and it could actually immediately cause issues for you and could be dangerous to your life and health. So, and SCBA needs to be worn in any situation where we're coming into an IDLH environment. So some of the hazards that we should talk about to our respiratory tract. So first one we'll talk about is particles. So basically, one of the products of combustion is very small particles, unburnt fuels. So these small particles could become suspended in the air. The superheated gases and smoke basically hold them there. Sources could be things like even vehicle exhaust emissions, chemical reactions, heated materials, metal compounds, and the primary one that we're going to face, which is combustion. Exposure to these particles can cause asthma, lung cancer, cardiovascular disease, premature death, nothing good, basically. And we encounter these particles during wildfires, during, and if we do any welding or metal cutting operations, operation of a fire apparatus and small engines basically create these particles through the exhaust. Operations following the explosion or a building collapse can put these particles and kick them up into the air. And of course, again, what we do most, structure fires. Another respiratory hazard that is found in the atmosphere are the vapors and gases that exist at structure fire calls. So gases exist at standard temperature and pressure. The vapors result from temperature or pressure changes that affect the solid or the liquid that is being burned. Both vapors and gases can be inhaled, ingested, or absorbed into the body through the skin. And these can cause illnesses and death. Exposure to these vapors and gases may cause cancer, again, cardiovascular disease, thyroid damage, respiratory problems, and in the best case scenario, eye irritation. Fire gases and vapors that can be created by combustion include things like carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, hydrogen cyanide, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen sulfide, nitrous gases, phosgene, sulfur dioxide, ammonia, formaldehyde. The list keeps going on. And none of these are good for us. Normal air typically contains about 21% oxygen. Anything that's 19.5% or less is actually considered an oxygen deficient environment. An oxygen level below 17% is dangerous to us. And so oxygen deficiency can occur in two different ways. Basically, the fire will consume large quantities of the available oxygen, and so now that oxygen is no longer available for us to use to breathe. And the fire can also produce large quantities of other gases, which decrease the oxygen concentration by displacing oxygen. So oxygen displacement is another way that we can get oxygen deficiency. Another respiratory hazard is heat. Heat itself. Inhaling superheated gases produced by a fire, it can cause severe burns on the respiratory tract. It can actually burn down and burn like right into your, the little hairs that are inside your respiratory tract there can become burned. And it can cause some serious damage and scarring inside your respiratory system. SCBA is often required for carbon monoxide and alarm calls as well. So most of our deaths at a fire, if somebody dying as a result of a fire, typically that is caused by smoke inhalation, not burns. It's not the fire that kills you, it's the smoke. So we need to remember to always use our SCBA at fire calls whenever we're in any kind of smoky environment, even on the exterior of a building. If the wind might shift, we should be in our SCBA and ready to put it on and go on air if the wind was to shift and push the smoke towards us. We also need to keep using it during overhaul. Even though the fire is out and maybe it's not even smoking much anymore, there's still trace amounts of these particles, vapors, and gases that are suspended in the air. And the burnt products of combustion are now actually going to start off-gassing, and they'll continue to release harmful chemicals into the air for quite a long time afterwards. So we use it during overhaul, we use it during the fire, and whenever toxic gases or an oxygen deficient atmosphere is possible. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different types of breathing apparatus that are available to us now. And we'll start with supplied air respirators. So what a supplied air respirator does is it uses a hose line that's connected to air outside of the hazard area. You can see on the photo on the left there, it actually has a long hose that's attached to it, and the air supply will remain outside of the hazard area. This is not used by firefighters for structural firefighting. Not entirely sure where this gets used, but I think things like mine rescues might be a good option for it. But you have to know how far, and have very few chances for pinch points and things like that, maybe hazardous materials situations where you don't want to expose the air bottles to that hazardous material either. So the way it works is the user will exhale their own breath through a one-way valve. They will then inhale, and the air coming in will be from those air cylinders that are now outside the hazardous environment. So again, specialized operations, hazmat, confined space, that's where we're going to be using this type of respirator. Now, air purifying respirators are designed to remove particulate matter or specific gases or vapors. Depending on what the cartridge you're using, they'll have very specific uses. These are often used in industrial settings. These are not suitable, again, for firefighting operations. They don't supply their own breathing air. It just filters out gross particulates. These can be in use during fire investigations when the particulate contaminants are the primary concern. So again, this is kind of after the overhaul situation, when we're digging around trying to figure out the cause of a fire. Using one of these is acceptable because, again, we're not talking about a lot of smoke and gases coming through. There is still some off-gassing occurring, but typically these cartridges can handle that. All right, we'll talk about closed circuit SCBA. So what a closed circuit SCBA does is it actually recycles the user's exhaled air. So we breathe out, the air basically gets scrubbed and it's reused, and we get to breathe the same air back in, but it's now been, with a little bit of oxygen injected into it. So again, many include small oxygen cylinders in addition to the chemically generated oxygen. They're often used for extended operations like mine rescues. That's what you'd use a closed circuit SCBA for. You do see a firefighter in here in this photo in one, not the type of SCBA we typically use. What we would use for structural firefighting is known as an open circuit SCBA. This is our most common, and it's used throughout the CSRD. And what an open circuit SCBA is, there's a tank of compressed air that provides the breathing air supply, and that is carried on the user's back into the fire where they need to be. Exhaled air is released to the atmosphere through a one-way valve. So the air is allowed to go out, but once you inhale again, the membrane on that one-way valve will close, and you're now inhaling the air, the clean air from the cylinder on your back. So the SCBA has many different parts of it, and we should know our SCBA inside and out when we're using it. So I'll just go through a few of them. They're all labeled on the picture on your screen here. So we'll start at the top left, and the voice amplifier. The voice amplifier comes equipped on all of our MSA G1 SCBAs. So we use the MSA G1 in the CSRD. We have a couple of departments that are still using Scott packs or older versions of the MSA packs because they got them very close to when we started doing the big switchover. But the majority of our departments, I believe 11 out of our 13 departments, have now fully switched over to the MSA G1. So the voice amplifier, it does what it says. It basically is a place with a little speaker that lights up and allows your talking to be amplified and come out through a little speaker on your SCBA. The harness, that's what's going to hold is going to hold the SCBA onto you. It basically consists of the shoulder straps and the lap belt. The regulator is what we insert into the face piece, and that is what is going to provide the air from the cylinder into our face piece and allow us to breathe the air from our cylinder. The RIT connection, also known as a RIC connection. Now, RIT stands for Rapid Intervention Team. RIC is Rapid Intervention Crew. We typically call it a Rapid Intervention Team in the CSRD. And what this connection is it's actually it's a quick connect coupling that can be used for us to supply air to a firefighter in the case of an emergency. So imagine we're in a situation where we're doing an interior attack. We deplete our air supply in our cylinder, and we're now in a mayday situation. We are running low on air. We don't believe we can get ourselves out, and we're in a difficult situation. A RIT activation will happen. And so the incident commander will now, once the mayday is declared, will send in a rapid intervention team. And one of the things they'll typically bring with them is a jump kit that includes a full SCBA bottle, and it'll have a hose attached to it that has the connector for the RIT connection. If you plug this on, if you connect the full bottle to this RIT connection, what happens is all of the air that's in that bottle is now available to use in the system. If you take it now, what will happen initially is both bottles will equalize. So if you had an empty bottle on your back and you had a full bottle that coming in with the RIT team, it ends up that both, as soon as once you connect it and once they have a chance to equalize, you're gonna have half a bottle on your back and half a bottle in the RIT bag. So if you take it off, that still gives half of a cylinder for the individual to use to get them out of the building. If that's not enough and you need the full cylinder, you keep it connected, and that way they get the entire cylinder that's by keeping it connected that way. The cylinder shutoff valve is on the bottom of the SCBA, and it's basically a little dial that you have to turn, and typically it's going to be on your back, and you're going to be turning it top towards you. The cylinder pressure gauge, that's attached to the cylinder itself, not the SCBA pack, and that will tell you the amount of pressurized air you have in your cylinder. The one on the air pack is the one that we will always defer to as being accurate. We do have another one that actually goes in our control module, which is where the pass alarm is in this photo. In that control module, you can actually see how much pressure is remaining in your cylinder. It needs to be within 10 psi of each other, basically. So the cylinder itself, pretty straightforward. They come in a variety of different styles. The ones we use in the CSRD are typically 4,500 psi, and they give you 45 minutes of breathing air. Again, that's going to be under normal conditions. And remember, we're going to be wearing full turnout gear. We're going to be wearing your full SCBA. We're going to be often in very hot, smoky environments and working very hard and therefore breathing very heavy. So don't expect that you're necessarily going to get a full 45 minutes out of that air pack. In fact, I've seen a member and an individual be able to take down one of those air packs and drain a bottle in 10 minutes. So it all depends on your physical conditioning, your ability to conserve air, your breathing techniques, and the type of work you're being asked to do. And then the face piece, again, straightforward. This is the piece that we're going to don over top of our head. It's also got a thermoplastic on it that prevents the heat from coming at us. They can be compromised. They end up glazing when they get exposed to extreme heat conditions. They can end up glazing, and in some catastrophic situations, they may actually end up failing. And then the pass alarm. The pass alarm is part of the full control module, and that's what the arrow is pointing at, is the control module. The control module, as you can see, has its own pressure gauge on it. It also gives you a digital readout of the pressure in your remaining in your cylinder. It has buttons on it for activating your pass alarm. And some of them actually even include a thermal imaging camera in them that can be used, to see the heat around you as well. The one thing that I don't have on here that is included typically inside the SCBA and with the regulator in the face piece, you have what's called a heads-up display. Now, the heads-up display for the MSA G1, typically it's a series of lights, and you'll see and as the lights go down, green means you're in good shape. Once it gets to yellow, you're going to have to start thinking about getting yourself out. Once you're into red, you have to start getting your way out. The ones in the G1, they tend to come on intermittently. When there's a change, when you first turned it on, that's when it's going to happen. But they don't stay on the whole time. So we'll get a little bit deeper into the four basic components of SCBA. The first one we'll talk about is the backplate and the harness assembly. The backplate and harness assembly is basically a rigid frame with adjustable straps, which holds our breathing air cylinder on a backplate. The straps are designed to stabilize the unit. They help us carry part of the weight, and they provide a secure and comfortable fit. So the air cylinder assembly is the next one, and the air cylinder assembly holds the breathing air for the SCBA, so that's where we put the air cylinder. Air pressures typically range from 2216, which is our lower pressure cylinders and what we used to use in the CSRD, to 4500 psi, which we now use in the CSRD. And most fire departments are moving that way towards the 4500 psi more air. The neck of an air cylinder is equipped with a hand-operated shutoff valve. There's a pressure gauge that's located near the shutoff valve. A second remote pressure gauge is located where it can be seen during use. And again, we typically have that on our control module where we can see it during use. So again, the pressure reading, and something else to remember, right, is the pressure reading on the cylinder and the remote pressure gauge should be within, I think I said 10, but it's within 100 PSI of each other. That is 100 PSI is the biggest gap you can get. If it's more than that, we take it, we flag that unit, and we put it aside, and we alert our officers so that that unit can be checked by a qualified third-party contractor. We need to be careful that we don't damage the threads on the cylinder. We don't want to let dirt into it because what's going to happen then is that you're not going to be able to have a full seal, and we could end up bleeding air to the environment and not having it available for us when we need it. So the regulator assembly, when you first see it and when you first take your SCBA out, it should be mounted to a waist belt, a shoulder strap or face piece. And for us, for the G1s, it's on the waist belt. And the regulator helps control the flow of air. Some have dual path reducers. Slight positive air pressure is produced in the face piece by this. So it's a little bit like, positive pressure ventilation. There's positive pressure inside the face piece. It's not a lot of pressure, but it's enough to prevent smoke from coming out if there are minor leaks somewhere within the face piece. The activation of the regulator requires that we have to first open the cylinder valve so that we've started the airflow, we've done the SCBA, and we attach the regulator to the face piece. We also then need to, with the G1s and with most other SCBA, we need to take a deep breath in to actually break the membrane and start the airflow. They didn't tell me that the first time I put on an SCBA, and I ended up having to rip my mask off saying, I can't breathe. So it's a very important thing to remember. So in emergency situations involving regulator malfunction, we can use the purge valve or the bypass valve, and that's that little red knob on the top there. So we open that, and that actually now we're breathing the ambient air, only to be used, again, in emergency situations. That's what the bypass valve is for. So competent operation in the dark with your SCBA is essential. In the dark, wearing gloves. This is something that, especially if we're going to be doing interior operations, we need to be very competent at using our SCBA and able to do it in the dark and wearing all of our PPE. Because if something happens inside of that building, you're the only one who's gonna have the best chance of getting yourself out. The final piece we'll talk about is the face piece assembly. Again, the face piece assembly provides fresh breathing air while protecting your eyes and your face from injury. The face piece must fit tightly to your face. We have different sizes, and we do fit testing every year. So ensure that you're using the one that's fit for you. Most departments, and over 80 to 90% of the population of the planet will fit in a medium-sized face piece, but there are those who don't. And so if you find that you've got a face piece that doesn't fit, talk to your officers, get a proper fit test done, and find the one that's going to fit you. So the face piece frame and lens are made of a clear safety plastic and mounted in a flexible rubber face piece frame. They're governed by what's called NFPA 1981, so a different regulation, but it requires that all new SCBA face pieces are now equipped with that heads-up display that I talked about, which we have in the G1, but it's not on all the time. Head and harness straps, basically they hold the face piece snugly against the face with adjustable straps, a net, or other type of arrangement. The exhalation valve is a one-way valve that releases exhaled air without admitting any of the outside atmosphere in. The nose cup. The nose cup is actually there to deflect exhalations away from the lens. That helps to reduce the fogging or the condensation buildup inside. The speaking diaphragm is a mechanical diaphragm that allows basically some limited communication by the wearer. In our case, it's actually been replaced with an electronic speaking diaphragm connected to our voice amplifier. And then there's a regulator fitting or hose connection, basically, and that's going to be right on the front of the facepiece, and that permits us to the regulator or the hose to attach directly to the facepiece frame. Some additional components we'll talk about. So the first one I'll talk about is that personal alert safety system alarm. So the pass alarm emits a loud alarm to alert personnel that a firefighter is in danger. It will activate when a firefighter is motionless for more than 30 seconds or when the firefighter presses the emergency button. So you don't even have to be conscious for the pass alarm to activate. It's been designed in a way that if you don't actually have a movement for 30 seconds, it will activate on its own. And there are pre-alarms that will go off before the full alarm will sound as well, to give you a chance to cancel it and say, yeah, I'm just taking a break, leave me alone. These pass alarms, the volume needs to be at least 95 decibels, and it needs to be able to go off continuously for an hour. It helps, again, rescuers that are trying to locate, yourself, a trapped, unconscious, incapacitated firefighter. Very useful in dark situations. Dense smoke, confined spaces gives us something to hone in on, and we can do honing searches using our sense of hearing. Integrated units are connected to the SCBA regulator and are activated when the main air supply valve is open. And that's the case with our SCBA. The G1s, as soon as we open it up and turn the air supply on, our pass alarm will activate, the control module activates, you'll start to see all the pressures, our voice amplifier activates, so we don't have to push any buttons to turn any of the electronics on. Simply by opening the air supply, all of the components and functions of the SCBA will now be operational. When it's time to turn it off, we do have to manually turn off some of those functions. So the control module itself, you'll still get pass alarms going off even if you shut down your air. And the reason why is the system itself doesn't know if you've shut down your air or if your cylinder has run out of air. It hasn't quite gotten to that level yet. So we need to actually manually turn off our system after we bleed the air out of it. So not only does it activate after 30 seconds of being motionless, it can also be manually activated. So as soon as we feel we're in a difficult situation and may need some help, that's when we call a mayday. That's when we activate our pass alarm. And I talked a little bit about that pre-alarm. It'll activate when you're motionless for 20 seconds. It's a little bit softer of a tone. It's not quite the full alarm sound, but it gives you an indication that it's going to go off in 10 seconds if you don't do something like move or double click it to stop it. So our SCBA also includes a low air alarm that will activate when the tank has 1/3 air remaining. Something to keep in mind: if your low air alarm starts going off, you need to exit that IDLH area as soon as that happens. If you're not in an IDLH area, again, you have nothing to leave at that point in time, but you should look at getting a new air bottle at that point. The low air alarm, again, 1/3 air remaining. And I said we had about 45 minutes on a good day. So we're going down, from 4,500 to having 1/3 remaining. So we're still at what, 1,500, 1,500 PSI when your low air alarm is going to be going off. That's close to what we used to be. Our old packs used to be 2216s, and now we're saying at 1,500 we've got low air alarms going off. So we need to be aware of that. But that last 15 minutes, that last 1,500 PSI of air, that's for you. That's for your family, for you to get yourself safe. The first 2/3 of that air are for your incident commander to get the job done. That last third, that's for your family to get you home safely. So there's a remote pressure gauge, and that's another part of the control module. It tells you what the pressure is within the cylinder. We talked about that. It has to be within 100 PSI. Talked about that. The pressure readings are most accurate at or near the upper range of the gauge. And when you're looking at them and you're trying to compare, we should always assume that the lowest reading is correct. That'll give, at least then we're going to make decisions based on that and not say, oh, I think it's going to be the higher one. And then we end up finding out that we didn't have that much air left. So I also touched on the RIT or the UAC connection. Again, the Rapid Intervention Team, Universal Air Coupling. That's what the UAC stands for, Universal Air Coupling. And it's located within 4 inches of the outlet. The RIT UAC, it allows the cylinders to be transfilled, like we talked about. So the air supply will equalize between the 2 cylinders when it's connected. And if we take it off, we've got we'll have equal amounts in both cylinders. If we leave it on, you've got the benefit of whatever was remaining in your cylinder, along with whatever with a full cylinder from the RIT team. So the heads-up display, SCBA now requires them. They must be visible in the face piece. Some of them contain like 4 light-emitting diodes, and that'll indicate the amount of air you have remaining in your air cylinder. Sometimes you'll have other LEDs inside of your face mask as well to provide additional information. All right, we'll talk a little bit about the different techniques for donning SCBA. So we must be able to, we talked about turnout gear, we need to be able to don in 1 minute. SCBA is the same. We need to be able to don the SCBA in 1 minute, 2 minutes for both together. Before we begin donning our SCBA, we need to be wearing our full PPE. We want to check our pressure gauges, make sure that we have at least 90% pressure in our bottles before we're starting. So the first and somewhat easiest method of donning SCBA is known as the coat method. You're donning your SCBA the same way you would put on a coat. So for the coat method, the SCBA has to be positioned on the ground in front of the firefighter with all of the straps fully extended. And this is the way we want to store our SCBA at all time. When we take our SCBA off, when we doff our SCBA, we want to make sure that we're leaving it in a state that anybody can use it, the next person to come to it. Because we don't have our own air packs. So it's not going to be the same person each time. We want to make sure that biggest guy in our department, smallest person in our department, they can both be able to put it on and adjust the straps as they need to. So the next one is the over-the-head method. This one will start, the over-the-head method typically starts with the SCBA is going to be on the ground with the top of it pointing at the firefighter. Straps again, fully extended. We want to grasp the SCBA by the back plate and lift it over our head. Then we put our elbows and our arms through the straps. So the last one we'll talk about here is the seat mount method, and only used if the firefighter can don it without removing your seatbelt. If you need to remove your seatbelt to put your SCBA on, you keep your seatbelt on and you put it on and you put your SCBA on when you get to the scene. Basically, there is another NFPA standard that requires that SCBA is held in place by some kind of mechanical latching device. And so I encourage you as well to take a look at your apparatus, see how your SCBA are in there, what is the latching device, and what is the release mechanism to get it out? Because the last thing you want is to try and figure that out after you've put it on, you've arrived at a scene, now you can't get yourself out and you're trapped to the scene. So the air cylinder's position in the seat back should match proper wearing position of the firefighter. So typically they're held in a place where it's very similar to very close to where you would be wearing it as a firefighter. Once again, when we leave the SCBA in the seat mount, we want to make sure the straps are fully extended, and we want to exit the apparatus very carefully. There is an extra weight now with the SCBA, and that can make slips and falls much more likely. So for the donning of the face piece, to perform it correctly, the face piece has to be the correct size. When we talked about that, your department should be doing annual fit testing, and the fit testing is about testing the fit of your mask and making sure that there are no gaps. And we do what's called a qualitative fit testing, which we use a bit of an irritant smoke. And we put it around the outsides, and we get you to do a bunch of different tasks, including, talking, looking up, looking down, left, right, and that helps us to know if there's any areas there where the smoke is able to get in, and maybe you don't have the proper size and face mask face piece in that situation. We can't have any facial hair in the seal area. Now I've got a nice goatee, but basically there's no hair around where the mask will make contact with my skin, and I've sent people home from live fire training before because they didn't shave beforehand, or I've made them shave, and I typically bring with me, a nice Bic razor, disposable razor, and a bar of soap. Typically not a lesson you're going to forget, and won't do it again. Any eyeglasses that pass through the seal of the area can't be worn with the face piece. There are specialized frames we can get for inside of face pieces. If you need to wear corrective lenses, we can purchase you a set of these frames. You would then take them into your optometrist and get your own personal prescription fitted inside of these frames. The frames can then be put inside of the SCBA mask. So the procedure for donning the face piece is, again, like everything else, we want the straps to start fully extended. We want the chin cup and the harness centered. It's centered on our face. We want to check, once we've put it on, we want to ensure that there's a proper seal. We're going to then don our protective hood over the harness and straps, and the helmet will go over top of that. So it's very important that we ensure that there's a proper seal on the face piece. We do that by doing what's called a negative pressure test. We put the palm of our hand over top of the opening for the where the regulator goes in, and we inhale. And if the mask sucks back into our face, we know we've got a good vacuum in there, and that we've got that it's tight and there's nothing coming around the seal. If we start feeling leaks, we need to readjust the harness straps. So now we'll talk a little bit about what's called going on air. I'm going on air. All right, well, that means it's, you've got your SCBA on. Now I'm actually going to breathe the air from the cylinder. So to do that, a couple of steps need to happen. First off, the air supply from our cylinder, so the little dial, shut the open close valve on our bottle, needs to be fully open. This will turn on, and like I talked about, this will turn on all of our electronics, our pass device, our voice amplifier, and the control module. Everything will start lighting up right away. We attach the regulator to the face piece, and then we take that deep breath in. This is required to begin that airflow, and don't forget that part. All right, with SCBA Doffing, the procedure for doffing SCBA, we turn off the air supply first. We open the bypass. We're going to take the regulator out before we do that. So we've taken the regulator out. We've turned off the air supply. Now we need to open up that bypass, the red knob on the regulator. And what that's going to do is it's going to bleed the rest of the air that's in the system. So there's no more air in the system. Once that's done, you'll hear it go quiet. We're going to want to turn off our pass alarm. So again, like I said, the electronics will turn on by themselves. They do not shut off by themselves. So to turn off the pass alarm, we basically double click the green button on the control module. And you can see here, that picture in the center, it's got the firefighter has their thumb on that green button. A double click there, and that's going to turn off the pass alarm. Failure to do this, again, it leaves your pass alarm on, and it's going to cause the pack to go into full alarm after 30 seconds. This is very annoying to an incident commander. Basically maintaining your pass alarms and making sure that you don't have superfluous pass alarms going off all over the emergency scene is very important. There's enough confusion at a fire scene. We have very loud fans running. We have apparatus. We have people talking, and and the fire itself may be very loud. You may have bystanders. So the incident commander has a lot on their plate. And if they start hearing all these pass alarms start going off, or anybody's pass alarm starts going off, it's something that we're very conditioned to respond to. So anytime then that you can make sure you're doing a little bit of a movement, and the motion sensor for our pass alarms is actually in that control module. Some of them have it down at the waist plate. Ours, again, in that control module, all we have to do is move that around a bit, and it knows, okay, you're good. It'll turn the alarm off. It will not go into full alarm. So again, now after we've done all that, we've turned off our pass alarm. Now we're going to extend those straps fully, both for the SCBA and the face piece. Now it's ready for the next person who wants to use it. We want to check the remaining pressure in the cylinder. Put a full cylinder in if you're under 90%, and then we're going to want to store that SCBA securely, whether it's in the apparatus mount, whether in a seat mount, in an apparatus mount, or somewhere at the fire hall. We want to securely store it. We want to leave that SCBA in a ready state for the next user, right? straps extended, full cylinder, and that face piece needs to be cleaned and sanitized. Replacing SCBA cylinders, there's a procedure that's important for it. So the procedure for replacing an SCBA cylinder is, first we want to ensure that the air supply and the pass alarm is is off. We want to open the cylinder band latch, and you see basically with the G1, it's a steel band that has basically a little buckle on it that you have to that you click on both sides. You open it up, and it kind of pops open this metal band. On the pack that you see in the picture here, and that appears to be a Scott pack, it has a mesh band on it. But we're going to want to open that latch. We want to unscrew the high pressure hose from the cylinder. In our case, actually, most of our SCBA now, the G1s, have a quick connect coupling, so it's not actually unscrewing it, it's just popping it off. And there is a technique for doing that. Again, you'll be taught that at your fire halls. You'll then place the new SCBA cylinder into the SCBA, and you're going to attach the high pressure hose. Again, with us, it's a quick connect, so it's putting it back. It's basically just popping it back on and pushing, and you'll hear it click, and it's good to go. Before we do that, though, we want to check that O-ring inside of that high pressure hose. Make sure it's there. If it's not, you're going to bleed all of the air from the cylinder out into the atmosphere, and that pack won't be usable at all. If it is missing, it needs to be replaced. Possibly you'll have some backups at the hall. More than likely, you'll have to order it and get a repair person to send you some. So once we've attached the high pressure hose, the last thing to do again is close that cylinder band latch, and you've got a brand new cylinder ready to go. Refilling SCBA. So refilling SCBAs requires compressors and cascade systems. Proper training is required to fill SCBA cylinders, and only trained personnel should operate the fill equipment. If you're interested in learning how to do it, or if you're out of your fire hall long enough, you're going to be taught how to do it. So again, compressor and cascade systems are used for filling SCBA. Compressor and cascade systems are used for filling SCBA cylinders. So some of the safety precautions when we're refilling SCBA is we want to check on the SCBA for the hydrostatic test date. Now, the hydrostatic test date is the date when it was brought in. A third-party contractor who's certified to do this has checked, has done a bunch of quantitative tests that actually show if the bottle is damaged and if it can continue to be used. So we check that test date, make sure that the cylinder itself is not past a required test date. We want to visually inspect the cylinder for damage. So any abrasions, cuts, dings, dents in it, we want to look for that. We want to make sure we're wearing hearing and eye protection when we're doing this. So we're going to place the cylinder in a shielded fill station. Most of our fill stations now are enclosed. So it's called a fragmentation chamber, and it prevents in the event that an SCBA were to have a catastrophic failure, you won't be hit by shrapnel because it's within this fragmentation chamber. When we're filling the cylinder, we want to fill it slowly. And the reason we do this is filling air to a high pressure actually ends up creating and generating quite a bit of heat, and we don't want to overheat it. Because if you're putting superheated, if it becomes too heated, what ends up happening is you fill your cylinder to 4,500 psi. Once it cools down, it's actually going to read much less than that, and so it's going to settle. It can also be a damage to the cylinder itself, and these cylinders aren't cheap. We're talking, about $1,000 on average for a cylinder. So we want to make sure when we're refilling that the cylinder is completely full, but not over pressurized. There are safety mechanisms on the SCBA cylinders that prevent it from being overfilled too much. They will actually release if they get too much, if they're filled too much. But then once one of those releases, in many cases, the cylinder can't be used again, and certainly it's going to need to be sent away to be checked by qualified repair personnel before it's going to be able to go back in service. We and something else to keep in mind is breathing air quality is tested regularly by third-party testing facilities. The results have to be documented. We need to know that we're getting quality air, that it's fresh, that it's clean air that's coming in, and that we don't have the air intake going in places that maybe it's getting its air from a location where we have apparatus exhaust fumes coming in. So we're always annually checking that breathing air quality. So SCBA cleaning, we need to clean the SCBA and the face piece to remove contaminants. Dirty SCBA, like turnout gear, is hazardous. It contains the carcinogens. They get on your body, you're still touching them, and they can be absorbed through the skin, as we talked about. They can be inhaled as particulates, and they are all cancer-causing. We want to clean the harness assembly with soap and water solution, and a scrub brush is how we clean them. We want to clean the face pieces and regulators with a mild soap and water or a disinfectant solution. So we now actually have, all departments have been given, especially during COVID-19, we went out and purchased the disinfectant for SCBA face pieces. Now soap and water work great. And even with something like COVID-19, the soap and water works great. It's very this virus is actually very water soluble and is able to be washed away with that. We've opted for the added protection of going with the disinfectant on as well with it. And so use that disinfectant. It's at your fire hall. If you have questions on how to use it, every fire hall now has posters up at them that actually shows you the proper technique for cleaning your SCBA and your face piece. We also want to make sure that the SCBA fully dries before we return the equipment to service. Wet SCBA can cause mold, and it can also, again, cause steam burns, and if we're bringing it into a superheated atmosphere. So SCBA inspection and maintenance. The frequency is established by another NFPA standard. It's 1852. The schedule is going to be determined by the department, though. It's going to be based on NFPA, WorkSafe BC requirements, and manufacturer's requirements. It's typically going to be inspection and maintenance. In a career station, it's often performed daily. Could be weekly. Or whenever reporting for duty. It should be a part of our regular duty crew job, is to go through the SCBA, take a look at it, replace batteries. We do use rechargeable batteries in our new air packs, and they do drain just by sitting there. So your period between inspections shouldn't be too long in between. Qualified SCBA technicians have to inspect the units annually, and they need to be inspected after any repairs are done. So again, we must inspect our SCBA after each use. The beginning of a shift or a duty shift. In career departments, they're doing it every week at the minimum is when it gets done in a career department. We need to report repairs immediately, and we may need to take that unit out of service if the repairs can't be done in a timely fashion. So we'll start with the face piece inspection. So when we're looking at the face piece, we're going to look at all different things with it. We're going to inspect the frame. We're going to look for any deterioration, any dirt, any cracks, tears, any holes. We're going to look at the head harness and the buckles, the straps, and the webbing that's on it. We're looking for wear, for breaks, any loss of elasticity. We're going to look at the lens as well for scratches, abrasion, holes, cracks, any kind of heat damage. Heat damage, certainly take it out of service immediately. It's unlikely you're going to find a face piece that doesn't at least have a couple of little scratches on it, but if the scratches become too much where you can't see anymore, that becomes a safety issue. That face piece should be taken out of service, and a new one should be purchased. We're going to take a look at the heads-up display as well, make sure that it operates properly. We're going to take a look at the lens for a proper seal with the face piece frame. So make sure that that lens is right in the frame, there's nothing going on, and it's not pulling away from the rubber seal. We're going to inspect the valve seat for the exhalation valve. We're going to inspect the springs and covers to ensure the cleanliness and ease of operation. We're going to inspect the regulator and the hose connection points for cleanliness, any damage, and make sure it operates properly. And we're going to inspect the speaking diaphragm for cleanliness and damage and make sure that it's working properly. So with the backplate and harness inspection, very similar. We're going to inspect the harness and straps for abrasions, cuts, tears, heat, or chemical-induced damage. We're going to make sure all the buckles, fasteners, and adjustments, they're going to operate properly so that when we need to put it on in an emergency situation, we can do it quickly. We're going to ensure that the harness straps are fully extended. I think you're seeing a bit of a common theme here. And we're going to inspect the cylinder retention system to make sure that it operates properly and doesn't have any damage on it. We're also going to ensure that the cylinder is securely attached to the backplate. So the breathing air cylinder assembly and inspection. So we want to ensure that cylinder, and I talked about this before, which was the hydrostatic test date, it's current. The photo on the right there actually shows you a fairly a standard picture of what one of these stickers may look like, and it'll depend on where you go. But there should be something on there that actually has a date on it. And here you can see that it has 3rd month, year 00. That was when it was done, right? So basically it needs to be done every 5 years for the carbon fiber style bottles that we use. We want to inspect the cylinder gauge as well for cleanliness and any damage. So the gauge being the pressure gauge there at the bottom on the picture on the left. We want to inspect the cylinder body for any cracks, dents, weakened areas, any heat or chemical induced damage. We want to inspect composite cylinders for cuts, so cuts, gouges, some loose fibers or any missing material. We want to inspect the cylinder valve outlet, sealing surface, and the threads for damage. We want to check the valve hand wheel for damage, make sure it has proper alignment, it's able to work, and has a secure attachment. And we want to check the cylinder to ensure that it is full. So then there's the other components that need to be inspected. So with hoses, we inspect our high and low pressure hoses for abrasions, any bubbling, cuts, cracks, and heat and chemical induced damage. We want to inspect hose fittings for cleanliness and damage. We're going to visually check the high pressure hose as we talked about for that O-ring, make sure it's not damaged and it's there. We're also going to test the hose connections for tightness, make sure everything's nice and snug. We don't have anything loosey-goosey. The low pressure the low air pressure alarm, we're gonna inspect that as well. We want to make sure it's working. Check the mounting hardware for cleanliness, proper attachment and damage, and we want to test that alarm for proper activation and operation. You can see here they bled the air down and it looks like it's at 34. 34 PSI, all but empty, basically. Your low air alarm should have been going off well before that. But when I look at the pressure gauge on the top, it actually looks like it's more around 2,500. So, all right, so the regulator, we're gonna inspect the regulator controls and pressure relief devices for cleanliness, proper operation, damage. We're gonna inspect the housing, all the components, and we're gonna look for cleanliness and damage. We're going to check the regulator for any unusual sounds during operation, like if you hear a whistling, a chattering, clicking, rattling, anything like that, that's a sign that something wrong is happening. We want to check the mainline and bypass valve for proper function as well. Make sure that the bypass valve can open and close properly, and that the air will flow through the mainline as well. So there's also the pressure indicator gauge. We want to inspect those remote pressure indicator gauges for cleanliness and damage. We want to ensure those pressure readings on the cylinder pressure gauge and the remote gauge are within the manufacturer's recommended limits. 100 PSI is what we're looking at. So, and then the integrated pass alarm. I kind of had a pointing at both because these are both components of the integrated pass alarm, both on the control module and in the the back there. What that is the audible alarm. That's where it's going to come from. So we want to inspect the pass device for cleanliness, wear, damage, same as everything else. Ensure all the parts are securely attached to the pass device. We want to test all operating modes for proper operation. So we want to make sure after 20 seconds you're getting your warning, after 30 seconds it's going into full alarm, and that we can manually activate the pass alarm as well. And then we're going to test that low battery warning signal for proper operation. So we talked a little bit about it. Hydrostatic testing. Hydrostatic testing identifies leaks or flaws that might render that cylinder unsafe. Aluminum, steel, carbon fiber cylinders, they all need to be tested every 5 years. So we, and we're using the carbon fiber typically bottles, very similar to the one that's in the photo on the right and the left. Hydrostatic testing is only performed by qualified contractors. It's going to help us to identify any leaks or flaws that are going to render that cylinder unsafe. And any cylinder that's done it has to be stamped or labeled with the date of manufacture and the date of the last hydrostatic test. And there's, again, another picture of one of those hydrostatic test labels. So in summary, your PPE is going to protect you from hazards and minimize the risk of injury or fatality if it's properly worn, cleaned, and maintained. Your respiratory equipment can protect you from toxic gases and vapors, particulates, from disease, but only if it's properly used, inspected, cleaned, and maintained. Knowing how to select the type of respiratory equipment that is appropriate, as well as how to manage your air supply, are also very important. And these are all skills that you'll be taught at your local fire department, and some techniques on how to conserve your air. And the more you practice with it, the more comfortable you'll become. So thank you very much for your attendance today, and I will stop the recording.